Hey guys, Geoff Rohoman here, and it sounds unbelievable when I say it, but in a couple of weeks, it'll be 10 years since UFC 129 took over Rogers Centre in Toronto. 50,000 plus. It was the first UFC show in Toronto, and it was a massive hit. So I had to get my man Mark Hominick on Zoom to chat with me about this. Mark was in the co-main event. He fought Jose Aldo for the featherweight title on that card, and in my opinion, had probably one of the most memorable moments of the entire show. Mark, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, no problem. It's great to see you again. It definitely, when you say 10 years, man, it's crazy. I was having this conversation with a few people today at the gym, and it's hard to believe that it was that long ago. It feels like yesterday sometimes.
It's wild. And I know, like, fighting aside, like, that card had a special part in your family's heart, right? Because your wife was it that show that she was ready to go?
So my oldest daughter, she turns 10 in 2 weeks. So yeah, it's hard to believe, because it was just like a life-changing time, on a career point of view, like looking at, fighting for the world title, something I worked, 15 years to get to that point. And then obviously my first child. So it was definitely a life-changing moment. And looking back, it was a crazy roller coaster, the whole leading up to the fight, post-fight, and looking back, that's a memory that, I'll have to cherish for the rest of my life.
Yeah, for sure. I remember that being sort of like the subplot of your fight. Yeah. Like, hey, like, Hominick's wife is like, she's ready to go at any moment now, and he's got this, the biggest fight of his life. It was such a cool sort of experience, especially because, like, we were so invested in you because you were, at the time, George was in the main event, but you were like the hometown guy on that card, right?
Yeah, you know what? Like, and that I think that was one thing for myself, for my career. Like, it was the first time I really had a platform, and because for the media, it was the first time the UFC had been in Ontario, right? It was a record-selling show at this point, so there's a lot of new eyes on the sport. So basically, I'd finish a training session, I do media for 3 hours, I do another training session, I do another media for 3 hours, just because. Hey, Mark, Mark's the local guy. There's first eyes on the sport, whether it be newspapers, TV channels, radio stations, whatever it was, is all local. So it was all good. And I thought it was a good way, a good platform to kind of, show who I was, not just as an athlete, but as a person too. So, people got to really know my story, and I got a platform for the sport as well. Like, this is something, I've been involved with since I've been 13 years old. And obviously very passionate about. So I got a platform to really speak to a lot of first eyes and ears to see the sport and the buildup. So everyone was a part of the buildup, and I think that helped the fight and the show itself.
Yeah, what do you remember about the buildup of that show being at the first one in Toronto? Like, I know obviously you wanted the title fight, and that could have come at any point during the calendar year, but like, did you see that as like, I need to be on this show because it's down the 401?
I think it was kind of a combination of both the UFC wanting that and obviously myself. I would have jumped at that opportunity at any time, but they seem, they're coming to Ontario for the first time ever. They're trying to sell out. At first, they were going to block off the Rogers Centre to, I think, like a 25,000 seat venue at first, and then they seen how popular it was going to be, and they kept opening up, and then all of a sudden they did the whole dome. And my fight before that, Dana White came out and said, he goes, if Mark Hominick wins, he will be fighting for the title on the Rogers Centre, because I think they were trying to say, hey, we had two Canadian guys. Obviously, George was carrying the show. He was the biggest. I think today, like outside of Wayne Gretzky, he's one of the greatest Canadian athletes of all time. I don't want to say just Wayne Gretzky, but again, George is recognized as that. So they are billing that. But again, to have a local aspect of it too, I think that really helped the show. So it put a lot of pressure before the fight. Like, I mean, it's a must win, obviously, with George Roop, because the UFC had that invested in me, and an opportunity for myself to fight, on the biggest show of all time, in front of my hometown crowd.
Yeah, for sure. Getting into the fight, I think that a lot of people, for me, like, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about your entrance. Because that song that you picked in that entrance, I remember the roof almost came off. Center. Talk to me about that entrance. Like, did you come up with the song? Like,
so I was the previous fight, actually, I was in the training room. It was Pat Barry. Pat Barry was on the card with me on the Fight for the Troops card. and he was just training, and I heard that song, and it just stuck with me. And then after the fight, I'm like, I thought that was just so fitting. Like, I'm coming home. Like, it was the first, I'd never fought. Like, I had fought previously for a decade, professionally, and this is the first time I got to fight in my home province. So it was a coming home story, and it was pretty cool because, like, I have my child. Like, I still live in the same small town that I grew up in, Tempster, Ontario, and the childhood friends that I grew up with were all there at the fight. It was pretty cool because they were there at my first fight, when I fought in Quebec and came up with my career. So it was like, I'm coming home story for all of us. So, it was like, we got to do this all together, and it was pretty fitting song and, fight.
Yeah, I mean, a lot has been said about the struggle that the UFC went through with the province to sort of get MMA legalized in Ontario, and obviously that showed that there was a market for it with 50,000 inside Rogers Center. Were you aware of how many people were in that building when you walked out or while you were fighting, or were you just fully in fight mode?
So I, I always like this, if you've been in a situation before and you know how to prepare for them, like, I think at that point I'd had, over 25 pro fights. I had 24 kickboxing fights. So I fought all over the world after this opportunity. So I like to say, hey, I'm ready. I've done this before. But what I never forget this moment is in the pre-fight. I always had this ritual. I'd always go out and watch the first fight in the crowd. From the start of my career, I always would go out into the crowd and watch the first fight as a fan. I always felt like I got to feel the environment. I got to feel the crowd, the energy, and what I was getting ready to do. And I remember walking out of this tunnel in the basement of the Rogers Center, and I just seen this mountain in front of me of people, and people started yelling, and they started seeing me and started yelling my name. And then it was like overwhelming, and I just went right back. Wow. So the first time I never watched a pre-fight, because it was almost like, it almost sucked me, like collapsed me, just seeing the sea of people, the mountain of people. And it was something I'd never seen before. I like to say, I've been here before, I've done that. But the walkout, same thing. I did, I don't look out of the crowd or anything like that. But I remember walking into the cage, and then the cage door shut. Jose Aldo came out, and I remember looking across the cage at my opponent, and I said to myself, I've been here before. So that's all that mattered. There's two guys inside a cage. I didn't care really outside of that. It was a sea of people. But I remember looking at my opponent, and I said to myself, I've been here before.
Yeah, and that fight against Aldo was, one of the great fights that have ever taken place in Canada. You look at John Jones and Gustafsson, and I look at that one. And like at the time, Aldo there was Anderson Silva, and there was as like the best fighters in the world, pound for pound. He was destroying guys, and you came out there and you put on a heck of a fight. And I say to this day, if there was a sixth round, I think you were the featherweight champion of the world.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, you know what? Like I knew going into that fight, I matched up really well with him. There's guys in that division that would have been a way worse fight for me at that time. Like a guy I would think like a Chad Mendez would have been a horrible fight for me, just stylistically. I just knew I matched it really well with him. And there was one thing I like, and I can honestly say this, I was not intimidated by him. If you've seen a lot of his opponents before, they were so terrified to stand up with him, and they're like kind of diving for a shoelace, trying to take him to the mat. And I just knew I wasn't that person. I can honestly say I was not intimidated by it. I knew I was going to get in his face, and I knew he'd never seen that. And in my style, my whole career, I always got stronger as the fight went on. A lot of my losses were in the first round. Like, I'm just one of those, I'm a slow starter, and I've always been that way. So I knew a 5-round fight was matched up well with me. And again, the longer the fight goes, and you can see in that bout that, I gained momentum and gained strength and confidence.
Yeah. And like I said, like it was an all-out war. It was fantastic. The picture of you with the Tacoma is obviously famous. For anybody that hasn't seen the fight, like I encourage you to go back and watch it. It's a fantastic fight. Coming out of that, like you said, like the pre-fight stuff was really, there was a lot going on during the fight. Post-fight, like what were you feeling sort of after the fight?
I was mad I lost, to tell you the truth. Like I remember like going back to the change room, and I didn't really know kind of the impact that the fight had. I think because a lot of my friends even said like it spoke to being Canadian and the toughness, and just it kind of characterized a lot of who and what Canadians are, as people. And, but again, my first initial thought, I remember being, obviously I had to go to the hospital after I got checked out, and I was mad that I lost, right? But then, in the days and the weeks following, I kind of got a feeling of the impact that it had on people, and just showing, the heart and determination. And I think it kind of characterized my whole career, just the amount of grit and work ethic and toughness. I think that's, what my whole career was based on. And, like anybody in this sport, there's a lot of ups and downs in fighting through things, like anybody in the sport, you can see, there's the exception, like guys like John Jones, but you see guys like even George St. Pierre, they've had a couple losses on their record. Like it's a sport where you have to deal with adversity and you have to climb through it. And I think that fight spoke to that. Yeah. You're in bad times, but you don't give up on hope on what you've worked for and given up your whole life for.
Yeah, absolutely. 10 years removed, like I say, that's crazy to me that it's been 10 years since that fight.
Yeah.
Looking back, would you have changed anything would you have changed the preparation, the
No,
nerve, anything like that? Like, are you a guy that just sort of accepts that's how it went?
No, it is what it, and the thing is, one thing that I always pride myself as being prepared, and I was prepared. I never went into a bout unprepared. Obviously there's some skill sets that maybe I didn't have in certain bouts, and that's God given, some of it. But again, I know that every time I stepped in the cage, I was prepared. And coulda, woulda, shoulda is not something that I look back on. Is like I had that opportunity and I gave everything I could to prepare and to fight.
Amazing. And I mean, even just to look back and say, look, I went 5 rounds, could have questionably the pound best fighter in the world who was just running through guys at that time. Like that's such an accomplishment in itself, just on the resume.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. Obviously, I didn't go in there to come out without the belt. And, that's something that, I fought my entire life for and trained my entire life for, but, he's a champ for a reason, or he was a champ for a reason, and he walked away with the belt still. But, also things in life happen for a reason. You look at, after that bout, 2 weeks later, I had my daughter. Another month and a half, Sean Tompkins, my coach since childhood, passed away. Things changed. And from there, if you look at, and then that was the last win I had, I didn't have a win after that bout. So I think, I fought my, 11-year career as a pro for that moment. And I gave every last inch of effort to do so. And I think, I look at my career, I look at it as that was kind of the ending, because it was almost like the beginning of the end. And I gave everything I had on that night. And I proved who I was as a person and as a fighter.
Absolutely. And I think this speaks to the popularity of Mark Hominick, because I think you might have been, in the history of Rogers Center, the only person to get universal cheers while wearing a Hamilton Tiger Cats logo into that building. I think you might have been the only guy to ever do that.
Yeah, it's funny because I still have a really good relationship with the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and they always talk about that too. Is like, this is the first time that a Hamilton Tiger Cats has been cheered in this stadium. So I guess it's kind of an inside feeling for people who follow the CFL and know the rivalry between the Ticats and the Argos. So I think that was a kind of feather in their cap, just seeing that someone wearing a Ticats hat was getting cheered.
Absolutely. Now, like you said, your career sort of came to an end shortly after that. I know you're in the gym. I know you're training guys and constantly. Do you ever get the itch again, or are you like?
No, and the thing is, I'm one of those people. I'm all in or all out. And I know I dedicated my entire life for fighting for that title. And now there's other things in my mindset, in my goals, because I'm not over exaggerating this. For 15 years, there was not a day I didn't wake up thinking about mixed martial arts and going to bed thinking about mixed martial arts. And that's not an overstatement. And almost a day after, or 2 weeks later, I had a daughter, and there was other things that took apart my focus of the day. And then I realized that that's what made me who I was, is that I was one-track mind on that goal of training, competing, and fighting. And once I had other things that, took up focus, it kind of, that was my identity of that's why I think I was successful in my career, is because I was so focused on that one thing.
Yeah, not to harp on the topic, but I'm curious, when you told your wife this is the date that I have to fight for the title and no due date. I'm curious what the interaction was. Was she like, hey Mark, like maybe we post?
Oh no, like
go
yeah,
for it, yeah.
yeah, like she was an athlete too coming up, so she understands the commitment and dedication to that. But again, like like I said, the timing and things happen for a reason, and I think it was a nice story, a nice fitting story that that was also part of the build up, right? And it's kind of funny looking back on the baby pictures, and I have two big black eyes, and like there's a story to tell, and there's also footage of like build up in interviews. There's lots of footage I can show my daughter, and she was a part of it.
Amazing. Mark, for fans that want to keep in touch with you, what you're up to now, what are you up to now? Obviously you said
you know what, so yeah, so I run a mixed martial arts gym, adrenaline training center with Sam Stout and Chris Ordecki. We kind of took over the gym from Sean Tompkins, when he moved to Las Vegas. And, it is a family martial arts gym. We do have guys that compete. We have a couple guys in the UFC like Jesse Ronson and Malcolm Gordon. So we still are producing fighters, but it is a family mixed martial arts gym. And I love every day of it. And like, there's not too many people can say they genuinely love what they do. And, I can say that as when I was competing. And now I can say that it is running in a mixed martial arts facility. So yeah, like, I mean, I'm there every day, and it's pretty cool because a lot of people come from out of town and like, they don't know that Sam and I are the ones that are running the gym. Like we're the ones teaching the class. So, we have a lot of experience and know-how, but again, it is a family gym that is open to all levels and ability.
I mean, those are the three Ontario legends right there in mixed martial arts. So if you're going to go train at a gym, my gosh, that's the gym to go to.
Mark, I appreciate it.
Yeah, Mark, I really appreciate you taking time out of your afternoon to sort of reminisce and think back on that card, which really was an incredible one from top to bottom. Canadians on that show, and then of course topped off with you and Jose and George and Jake Shields. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Always.